Well, good morning to you all. Happy New Year again. Hello to those on live stream. I know so many people are away sick this week, so the live stream has a even more important purpose than normal right now. We come now to Daniel 3. We're in Daniel before Christmas. We got up to the end of chapter 2, and therefore we're in chapter 3. It's kind of how it works here. We're going to keep going through Daniel till we get to the end of it. And as I've said to you before, Daniel is one of the most eclectic books in the sense of style. We're going to be dealing with eschatological things, and we're going to be dealing with narratives and stories, and there's a whole bunch of stuff here that for those of you who've come via Caesar and the church, whether you came to the church because of that or whether you were simply here while we were doing it, then there'll be lots of elements in today's passage that are very familiar to you. But as we start chapter 3, let's remember that it comes immediately after chapter 2. And chapter 2 is quite an important background as we come into chapter 3. So I'm just going to read from verse 46 of chapter 2, just so that we have the end of the previous chapter fresh in our minds. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and paid homage to Daniel and commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him. The king answered and said to Daniel, "Truly your God is God of gods and Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery." And the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. Daniel made a request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel remained in the king's court. Now, there's multiple elements in those last few verses that we're going to need fresh in our mind as we come into chapter 3. Context, of course, is everything. There in those last few verses, there's multiple things. Firstly, Nebuchadnezzar at the end of chapter 2, he had this dream, if you recall. He didn't understand what the dream meant. He asked for interpretation. The experts in sort of these astrological / scientific realms that they studied, that these people would normally be the ones who would be able to interpret dreams, but he doesn't want to be fobbed off. He doesn't want just to have someone give him an answer that wasn't legitimate. And so he says, "Tell me what the dream is, and then I'll know your interpretation is right." And of course they can't do that, which throws into question the legitimacy of their entire enterprise. But it is Daniel who saves the day. They're all about to be ripped limb from limb. No need to read that figuratively. They're about to be ripped limb from limb. Daniel is being collected for that very purpose. And he says, "Hold on a sec. Stop the press. I think we can do this." He prays to God. God reveals the dream. He shares the dream. And the dream is exactly what Nebuchadnezzar saw. So Nebuchadnezzar can trust his interpretation. Now, we're going to need to remember the background as well of what the dream was. There was a statue, and in the dream, that statue had a head of gold, and the head of gold was Nebuchadnezzar. And then as we go down through the statue, we're essentially going from a more precious metal to ones that are less precious, but as we go down, we're also increasing in strength. But more importantly, what's happening is we're going from one kingdom to another. And what Daniel has said to Nebuchadnezzar is that my God, Yahweh, the God of the Jews, he is the God who establishes kings and takes away kings. He is the one who made you king, Nebuchadnezzar, and when the head of gold is done and we come to the chest of silver, it is my God that will establish that king as well. That's essentially what's been said. And it's a risky thing to say to a guy like Nebuchadnezzar. Hey, yeah, you're very valuable, you're very important, but there are others coming after you, not as great in some ways, but stronger in other ways. But you won't be around forever. Your kingdom won't be around forever. You need to understand your place. There is a God who is above you, who has all authority. And Nebuchadnezzar's response is that God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and the revealer of mysteries. Now, we won't go back through it again in detail, but when we finished chapter 2, we spent some time, we looked at a parallel in John chapter 2 and John chapter 3 with Nebuchadnezzar. We went briefly to Nicodemus. We should have done it for longer by the feel of it. But Nicodemus is a parallel to Nebuchadnezzar in the Old Testament. And the reason that they're parallels is this, that they both expressed faith. They both expressed faith. They both said, we believe. But their belief was not sufficient. It was not saving faith. It was not saving faith. So Nebuchadnezzar has expressed a faith in God, but it's not a saving faith. Nicodemus comes to Jesus and says, you must be from God. I believe that you're from God. And Jesus says to him, you must be born again. Absolutely no doubt that he wasn't saved. And yet he had a faith of some kind. And Nebuchadnezzar has had this astonishing thing. He's had the dream. He's been able to have an interpretation of the dream. This guy has told him literally what he dreamed. He's essentially read his mind as far as he's concerned. He's attributed it to his God. It's this stunning, emotional, dramatic moment in his life. And he says, wow, your God is this. And I tell you what, there are many people who've been to churches and had dramatic moments in their lives that have been very emotional, and they've come away believing in something, in some way, shape or form, but they have not been saved. And much harm has been done by Christians accrediting salvation to those. We just don't know. It's possible for people to say, Lord of Lords, King of Kings, and not be saved. And the reasons for that is going to become clearer over the next few chapters. But that's a very important background moving in, as we're going to see. But the other thing to note from the end of chapter 2, well, maybe one other little one as well, and that is that Daniel receives great honor. And even incense, and we associate incense with worship, and incense is burned for Daniel. And it's interesting because the borders of worship and honor aren't as clear as we might like. We'll talk more about that as we come into chapter 3. But the other main thing is that Daniel now gets put into a very high position in the king's court, and he ensures that his friends who prayed with him, who were part of the events of chapter 2, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that they are given positions of authority, and they rule over the affairs of the province of Babylon, though not in the court as Daniel is. Now, all that background is necessary, because when we come to chapter 3, and we'll be here a few weeks, we're not going to get through it all today, so don't worry, but when we come to chapter 3, immediately we're told that Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. Now, there's two things that immediately have to come to mind when you hear the phrase image of gold. Because in the previous chapter, we had an image, and the head of that image was gold. So we've had an image of gold already in some regards. Now, most people at this point presume, and most in Christian history have presumed, that the image is an image of Nebuchadnezzar. That's possible, but it's not definitive. It's possible, but it's not definitive. What we do know is that the word image has a much broader meaning than, say, a statue. It's possible that it's Nebuchadnezzar, but it may not be. But it certainly is to some degree representative of him. Why? Because it's made of gold. It doesn't mean that it's completely solid gold. It's probably covered in gold. But this golden image has to in some way represent Nebuchadnezzar. Why? Because he was the head of gold in chapter 2. You can't miss that connection. So what does God give to Nebuchadnezzar? Here is what's going to happen. I'm God, I make kings, you're the head of gold, I've placed you there, but there's another one coming after you, silver, and then bronze, and then the iron and stone. And there's going to be these other things. And so Nebuchadnezzar makes an image, and it's just gold. It's all about him. At the very least, Nebuchadnezzar is focusing on, oh, look at me, I'm the head of gold. At the very least, he's being more than a little narcissistic. But it's quite possible that this is a response to the dream in saying, well, actually, you know what? Let's make the whole image gold. A rejection of the revelation of God. But like I say, it may not have been a figure in the sense that the statue of chapter 2 was. It may not have looked like him or represented him. You'll find that in every children's storybook. You find it, albeit in chocolate, in VeggieTales. I mean, everybody seems to presume this. But the image is, and let's look at it first in cubits, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. If you're reading through your Bible and you come across cubits, you don't tend to use cubits every day. Don't computer people measure something in cubits? A very different kind of thing. But you're not familiar with this. All you've got to do is take a foot and add 50%. That's your quick, easy reference guide to cubits, folks. Your public service announcements for the day. So what we've got here is we've got an image that is 90 feet high. 90 feet high. Now, just to get that into some kind of perspective, that's about an 8-story building. That's very, very high. So, you know, multiple houses on top of each other. This is no small thing. And it is 9 feet wide. That makes it very, very tall and slim. Now, I don't know exactly what Nebuchadnezzar looked like, but I'm guessing he wasn't built in quite those proportions. You don't find humans in that proportion. Nowhere, right? So no matter how slim you are, you're not going to be in a 10-to-1 ratio. It's possible that there was a very large kind of plinth or base or pedestal that it was placed upon that took away a lot of that ratio. So it's still maybe possible. And often the Babylonians would make images that weren't exactly representative of a person in a realistic sense. But you know, there are other images. Images are very broad. When we think of image, we think of representation of a person. And perhaps it's not the best word. There are examples of that era of things called obelisks, which are like big stone things, where they would have engraved upon them all the conquests and the victories that had been accomplished. And it's possible that that is what's going on here. The word image is broad enough to allow for that. So it may be a person, it may be a list of conquests, but the gold of the image signifies that it is there to connect to Nebuchadnezzar, to his kingship, and to the reign. And the idea is this, that you need to acknowledge how glorious and wonderful Nebuchadnezzar is. You need to acknowledge all that he has accomplished, and you need to bow down before this. You need to acknowledge his greatness. That's what's going on. A 90-foot statue is a pretty darn major way of going about that. And so it was set up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Whether Dura was a specific location, like there is many plains and there's a plain of Dura, it's a word that could be used of that kind of location, but it's basically the idea is that it's something that would sit in a flat area with mountains around. And the idea is that whether you're there, you can look up and see it, and whether you're up, you look down and see it. Everybody gets to see it. That's the point of the location. It needs to be seen. Then King Nebuchadnezzar, in verse 2, sent the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the councillors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So there's 8 different classes of people here. We'll go through them one at a time, and then we'll talk about the point of them. The satraps are the representatives to the king. The prefects are military commanders. The governors are pretty much what we would expect. They're civil administrators. Then we have the councillors. Again, what you would expect. They would counsel and give advice to those who are in authority. The treasurers does what it says on the tin, administers funds. The justices are those who administer in the realm of law, where the magistrates are actually really more the judges. They're the ones that pass judgment. And then we have this broad coverall, as it were, of all the officials of the provinces. So everybody has to come. So what do you see in that whole list? Is you see everybody who is connected to this country, to this system, to this government, if we can use that word. That everyone who is connected, whether it's the people in the financing, whether it's the people who are doing the legal side of things, whether it's the people advising the king. What we're basically talking about here, in its in a sense, is what we might say in America, is all three parts of the American system of authority. And what we have here is we have everybody coming together and united. The point is that there is no area here, whether it's military, whether it's economic, whether it's laws and legal and justice, whether it's, advising the king. Whoever you are, if you're in government, you are going to be there and you are going to do as you're told. Now, all of this comes in the backdrop of a few things. For us as a church, it comes in the backdrop of us teaching through Caesar in the Church series, so there's some familiarity with much of this topic. But in the book of Daniel, it comes after chapter 1, where Daniel's been told to do certain things, and he said, no, I'm not going to do it. He's already instigated the doctrine of the lesser magistrate, when in chapter 1, he's told by one person to do something, so he goes to the person underneath him, and first of all, he goes to the person and says, I can't do that, and the guy says, yes, you have to. So he goes to the person under him and says, can I get away with this? And he goes kind of behind. And so there is a precedent here already of essentially wriggling out of the mandates that the government might place upon them. Now, one of the things we dealt with in Caesar and the church is the fact that most Christians today, on the basis of a misunderstanding of Romans 13, they hold to a simplified interpretation that can best be summarized as obey Caesar unless it's sinful. And one of the purposes of our series was to go through Scripture and to show that that's not actually the case. We don't have to do everything that Caesar says unless doing so is sinful. Any more than you can read in the book of Hebrews to submit to your church leaders, and you have to do everything that I say unless it's sinful. And again, as every time I mention that, I make a plea. If you know anyone who does believe that, invite them to our church, because that would be really handy. But no, of course you don't. Of course you don't. There are limitations to authority. And so what we learnt in our series is that all authority belongs to God, that God chooses to delegate that authority to various parties at various times, but the authority that he delegates is his and it remains his. It's like us having a rental car rather than buying a car. We get to drive it, but it's not our car. God delegates authority, but it remains his. And all delegated authority is limited. It's limited in person. Not everybody has authority. It's limited in realm. When a person does have authority, it is in a specific realm. And it is limited with regards to extent. Even if you're the right person in the right realm, it doesn't mean you can do whatever you want to do. There are limitations. And this isn't just true of government. This is true in the home. This is true in the church. Again and again, I come across people who have left churches because of spiritual abuse in churches, because people tend to think, oh, well, I'm a pastor now, I can do whatever I like, I can tell people to do what I want them to do, and I can be in charge in every area. No, 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 no. That is not what the Bible teaches. There is tyranny, and let me be clear what I mean by that. By tyranny, I mean leadership that is going beyond the limitations that God has given it with its delegation of authority. So if you're a husband and you have leadership in your home, you have leadership to what end? To love your wife as Christ loved the church. If you think that anything in Scripture you read means that you get to be a busybody and to determine everything that she does and can do and can't do and looks at and says and what have you, and you, quite frankly, are a tyrant. And you do not understand biblical authority. And equally in the church, there are tyrants. There are pastors who basically take far more authority than God has given them. And of course, in the worst cases, then browbeat those in their congregation that somehow, if they don't accept these mandates and demands that are placed upon them, that they're somehow in sin. God have mercy on those who do that. And so when we look at tyranny, we understand that tyranny is an overreach of authority. So when we come to the book of Daniel, and we're looking at chapter 1, and we're looking at chapter 2 and chapter 3, multiple times we see Daniel and his friends having this conflict with authority. And it is not okay for us as Christians to come along and say, well, they were just being told to do things that are sinful, so that's fine, but it doesn't mean, no. It goes far beyond that. This is tyrannical leadership where there is a reaching beyond the realms of authority that they have. And tyrants hate to be withstood. They hate it. If there's anything that's going to make a tyrant angry, it's standing up to their tyranny. There's no fury on earth like it. You see it in the home, you see it in the church, you see it in every area where there is leadership. And so there is this mass gathering of everybody in an official position, seemingly, and telling them that this is what must be done. And to do this is tyrannical. Not because it's stepping into the realm of religion. And we're going to talk about this in a moment when it comes to the worship. But not just because it's stepping into the realm of religion, but because it's saying that people must do things that the government has no basis to do. No basis to do at all, even in a civil setting. But Nebuchadnezzar is really the best example of a tyrant that you might possibly come across. And so he, of course, is not concerned about these matters. Now, one little thing we have to deal with here, of course, which always comes up, and in fact, even more so than the image being an image of Nebuchadnezzar, this is the most presumed part of the book. And that is, and it differs in the presumptions, but everybody has to guess where Daniel is. It's like playing a game of Where's Waldo? Where's Daniel? Where is he? Oh, well, he's on holiday, or he's on vacation, or he's sick, or what have you. And everyone's trying to come up with a reason, because, of course, one possibility, which nobody wants to contemplate, is that Daniel was actually bowing down and the friends were the only ones standing up. Is that possible? Nah, probably not. I don't think there's anything in the book of Daniel that would suggest that. The Bible is very, very happy to show us the flaws of its heroes, even when they are the ones writing the book. So I don't suspect that there would be a problem in communicating if Daniel had slipped here and compromised. But I think the best guess I can come up with is simply that Daniel, we're told at the end of the previous chapter, went to the king's court. And therefore there may be a level which is above all of these other areas that are called together. You know, in the kind of way that, you can't go to a restaurant and you have to wear a mask, but then, you get pictures of all the governors and all the leaders and all the politicians hanging out without their masks on and going to eating at their favourite restaurants. In other words, there's a rule for you plebs, but not for us. So it may well have been a case that this just didn't apply, that Daniel was high enough up the ladder that he could do what he wanted as well. And so it didn't really affect him. But for whatever reason, he's not mentioned. Go away and speculate all you like. The fact is that the Bible's silent, and I tend to think that when it's silent, I should probably follow suit. So we have here then all these people are gathered, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now we're into verse 4. The herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, a bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar has set up." A couple of things to note here. Firstly, note that people are called from every language and tribe. This is not just for Babylonians. Remember, we know what the Babylonians do. They go in, they conquer a land, they take the best people, the creme de la creme, the ones that are going to be the ones that could benefit Babylon the most, and they bring those people back. That's what happened to Daniel and his friends. Remember, the invasion of Jerusalem and of Israel, of Judah, happens in 3 stages. Daniel and his friends were taken in the first stage. And then I think it's 8 years later we have stage 2, and another decade we have stage 3. And more people came later on. But initially they take the top guys and they bring them in because they're the ones that will benefit Babylon. So there are going to be many people who are there in Babylon, who are working, who are involved, who come from other nations. They're from other tribes, they have other languages, they're other people, and they have other gods. They've come from a land that worships other people. And all of those people, wherever they're from, are included. There will be no religious exemptions. That's essentially what's being said here. There will be no religious exemptions. Whoever you are, wherever you come from, you have to be there. And then we have the list of all the instruments. And, you know, whenever you have lists like this, it's interesting because different Bible versions will come up with so many different words to try and communicate what these instruments are. And quite frankly, normally that means we don't really know. There are instruments that you play with strings and there's instruments you blow into. Both of those kinds. and variants within those kinds, but we don't know fully. All I can tell you as somebody from Scottish heritage, if there were bagpipes there, it wouldn't be encouraging you to come along necessarily, but, you know, just my opinion. But, you know, there's a broad smorgasbord of musical instruments that are being used. But let's not miss the big point here. That when people are gathered, there is music being played. Now, there's two sides to this. You can view this in a worship sense, in the sense that we have music to come to worship. But you can also view it in the sense that we have music is an event. Music is something that is an event for people, you know? Concerts, big stadium events, there's always music. You go into the ball game and there's the anthem sung at the beginning. They play music in the background. You know, there's always music because it generates responses in us. Now let me just, before I get into this, just say, music is an emotional thing, and that is God ordained. Music is supposed to be emotional, right? Like, there are words that we sung this morning, and they're powerful words, and you put music to them, and the emotion of those words can be carried more efficiently. This morning, we sung, you know, those he saves are his delight. He will hold me fast. Man, I mean, that song, I know that the history of that song, and it was written at a time when the guy who wrote it was just feeling like his faith was just about to fall apart. And there's that realization that our faith is not dependent on us, but it's dependent upon the God who calls us. And if you're feeling that way, if you're feeling crushed, if you're feeling broken, then those words, biblically sound, can be catapulted by the music, by the melody, by the tune, to be really emotional, to carry the emotions that are already within the words, but carry them more efficiently. Music is a powerful thing, and that is not bad. That is a good thing. That's how God ordained it. But it makes it open to incredible forms of manipulation. You know? I wonder how many people have been there at a kind of some sort of church meeting. Bow your heads. If you want to respond, just lift your hands up. Keep your eyes closed, you know, and the music plays at a minor key. And there's all the emotion that's generated. Lots of people have made false professions of faith because they've responded in emotions rather than with all of their heart and their mind and their soul. And so music can generate that. So what's happening here is this impact where people are being manipulated in this way. Here, let's put on the band, let's make things happen, and then it's this big event and you're more likely to go along with it. It essentially brings down your levels of your standards. Now, this, by the way, guys, I see all the time. It never ceases to amaze me how people who I consider to be, you know, pretty sound Christians, relatively mature in their faith, you'll say, well, what about this doctrine? Oh, no, that's not good. No, I like solid stuff. I like to have stuff that's biblically sound. And yet you look at the words that they sing in church and you go, what? There's no consistency. I don't get it. I don't understand it. and it will never make any sense to me, but there are vast numbers of Christians out there who have a level, theologically speaking, for the things that they will read, but you put a bit of music to the same words, and suddenly anything goes. I just don't get it. There is a reason why we don't sing Hillsong, why we don't sing Bethel, why we don't sing Elevation. It's because those places teach heresy. We don't support their ministries, we don't sing their songs, and even if you can pick an individual one of their songs that might say, well, these specific words don't seem to be problematic, the way they mean it probably does. And we need to understand that, you know, it's like, you know, like when people say to you, well, take this pill, and this will do whatever the pill's supposed to do. But if we inject you, it'll go straight to your bloodstream and it will work quicker and faster. Music is a bit like that. It's like bypassing and affecting you more easily. And these groups, isn't it interesting? It almost seems that the more heretical a group of churches are, the better their music ministry is. Why? Because it's a Trojan horse. You know? You remember the Trojan horse? You know what a Trojan horse is, right? That there's the gates and the city's closed up and we're not going to let the enemy in. And oh, here's a gift. It's a nice horse. Oh no, we wouldn't expect you to listen to our sermons, but here, have a worship album. No. We have to take this stuff seriously, folks. Music is so easily used to manipulate people. And we've got to watch for that. But certainly it makes for the event here, and it's to draw people to bow down before the statue. So I think the last thing we need to note before we go to verse 6 is simply this. What is happening here in a religious sense? Because I think that one of the things I've come across over the years is that the tendency is to come to this passage and to oversimplify it and say, well, look, it's really very, very simple. The Jews worshipped Yahweh. They worshipped God. And here they are being asked to worship something else. And so they mustn't worship something else because they worship Yahweh, and therefore that's wrong. It's not exactly what's going on here. I think the first thing we need to realize is this. The first thing we need to realize is this. Is that because we as Christians understand our worship in a certain way, and we understand our God in a certain way, we tend to impose those meanings on the terms worship and God. In other words, because we worship a monotheistic God, because we believe in one God who created the heavens and the earth, and everything that is created was created by him, and nothing that has been created wasn't created by him, then there is God, capital G, who encompasses all, right? That's the nature of monotheism. But not all gods are like that, right? The Babylonians had multiple gods. And it wasn't a case of saying, oh, you know, you worship Dagon, do you? Phew, you know, oh, those Dagon worshippers, you know, we much prefer Baal over here, you know. It's not like that. They all worship Dagon, and they all worship Baal. And this misunderstanding is absolutely crucial when you then impose it on the word worship. When you come to understand worship, for us worship, what is worship? It is our complete devotion to God, barring all others, right? Like if we say we worship God, we mean by that to the exclusion of worshipping other gods, don't we? At least I hope we do. But that's not necessarily the case. They could worship Baal one day, worship Dagon the next, and worship Bel another day. That's perfectly fine for them. And that's often been the case. So when we go from Old Testament to New Testament, when we go from Nebuchadnezzar, the archetypal Caesar, to the literal Caesar of the Roman Empire, then we often hear about the need for people to worship Caesar. Nobody was asking them to cast aside Yahweh. No one was saying, oh, you've got to leave Jesus behind. We don't want any of Jesus' worship here. They're just simply saying that you need to worship Caesar too. And so the word worship in this context, the idea of what's going on here, is a very, very watered down form of worship as we might understand it. Any person who was a Jew who is here at this time doing this would not think that they were betraying Yahweh. They just say, you know what? Man, this is an amazing set of accomplishments that Babylon's done. You know, we were in our nation, we got conquered. They've conquered hundreds of nations. Man, they're doing so well. Look at all the accomplishments. It is a pretty amazing thing. We're quite proud to be Babylonian. This is a worship almost of Babylon as much as of Nebuchadnezzar. Certainly of the concept of that government at that time. And I want you to understand all of this, because what is essentially going on in this picture is what we call statism. Statism. And statism is this. What G.K. Chesterton said, that when you take God out of government, then government ends up becoming God. I'm paraphrasing and butchering it, but that's essentially what he said. We are human beings made in the image of God, and we have deep within us a desire to worship. And there's nothing that we can do to get away from that. I don't care if a person claims to be an atheist, they are a worshipper, and they are worshipping something, even if it's only themselves. But we are all worshippers. And what statism is, it is elevating government to the place of a God that in some form deserves and is worthy of some watered down form of worship. Now, I've said this before in Caesar in the church, and I'll say it again probably many times, but we need to understand this. Romans 13 teaches that the role of government is to punish evil and to reward and honor good. That's their role. And we're glad that we have government. Government is a good thing. I don't want someone coming to my house and stealing my stuff and killing my family. So I'm glad that there's a government. I'm glad that there's law enforcement. I'm glad of these things. This is how God ordained it to be. But God is the one who declares what is good, and God is the one who declares what is evil. And when governments suddenly decide that they will declare what is good and what is evil, and when their declarations differ from God, then we have governments not doing even remotely the same thing that God's called them to. And God has not given them authority to do that. That's tyranny. And what tyrants do is they collect power like children collect Pokemon cards. Probably not anymore, I'm probably showing my age, but you get the point. They like gathering bits of power. Oh, they're doing this now, let's make them do that, let's make them do this. Tyrants love power. And what we're seeing right now, this time in the world, is we're seeing governments deciding that as well as doing the job of punishing evil as badly as they do it, that they're also going to be in charge of everything else. They're in charge of your education and what you believe and what you learn and how you learn it. They want to be in charge of your finances, what you can spend your money on and everything else like that. They want to be your doctors and in charge of your medical health and your medical decisions. They want to be your parents, you know. You got young children. We use this example in Caesar in the church. You have young children. You say to them, 8 o'clock is your bedtime. How many children want to go to bed when it's their bedtime? Very, very few. But you tell them to do it because you know better and you're in charge. And you say, no, you must go to bed. And if you get out of bed, you're going to be in trouble because it's your bedtime. The government is not our parents. They don't get to make those kind of decisions. And absolutely, most certainly, they are not our God. Now, people would say, well, of course we don't believe government's our God. Really? Really? You say that with a straight face? If it's in the Bible, we believe it and we have to obey it because God is sovereign over all and we have to do what he says simply because he's God. You ask most people why they have to do what the government says and they'll simply tell you because it's a rule and the government said it. That looks a lot like a God to me. Well, if I don't do it, then I'll be judged. Well, who's the judge in my life? Who's the one that I fear as judge? Oh, that would be God. Sounds a lot like a God. And so when we look at how the state wants us to respond, it wants us to be in agreement, it wants us to be in compliance, it wants our devotion, it wants us to tell us how to live and to what to do, and it wants us to obey simply on the basis that they've said and that's enough. That is what a God looks like. That is the God of statism. And again, This is not a monotheistic God, and therefore the worship that's going on in chapter 3, because whether it represents Nebuchadnezzar more literally or more figuratively, this is certainly a worship of all that state in its current condition represented. There are many, many Christians in this day and age who need to repent of the idolatry that is statism. We have one God who sets the rules. He delegates authority with limitations. If we go too far from that, we stray into statism, and we are bowing the knee before Caesar. And there are Christians who will read chapter 3 of Daniel and say, oh, that's terrible, I would never do that, who are, for all intents and purposes, doing exactly the same thing today. And of course, that isn't to say that if Caesar says, do this, that if you do that, you're immediately a statist. I'm not saying that. You might agree with Caesar saying something. You might want to do something. You might choose to do something. That's a very different thing. We need to watch that we haven't given authority to the state that God hasn't, given devotion to the state that it only belongs to God, and given roles to the state that God should be fulfilling. Now, all of that then leads us to the outworking of what would happen in disobedience. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. As I said, tyrants don't like the word no. They simply don't. I can remember when my kids were very, very young, so it's kind of really stretching the limits of my memory now, but I can remember when my kids were very, very young, that, you know, there was some issues over one of our kids and how we were choosing to, you know, it was to do with feeding and eating and stuff like that, and we were making decisions about how to raise our children. And we've never been particularly kind of compliant with what everybody would have us do. But we wanted to raise our kids a certain way, and God, as parents, has given us authority to do that. So that was to do that. And the doctor said, oh, you shouldn't do that. And we said, essentially, no. And this doctor came to us and actually said this, no one's ever said no to me before. And it struck me even back then that was a very scary thing. That here's someone in a position of authority that is just so used to wielding that authority and people accepting that no one's ever said no to them. No one's ever said no. I'd love to go on a rabbit trail here and talk about how, if you're in leadership, how you would deal with someone saying no to you and the way that you need to think. But let's just say humility and leave it at that, and you can fill in the gaps for now. I need to keep going with this text. But tyrants don't like being told no. And so you will do this, or else you're going to be thrown into the fiery furnace. In other words, there was no option given. This, folks, is what scares me with what's going on right now with the battle for vaccine mandates. If you get vaccinated, fine, your choice. If you don't, fine, your choice. What scares me is a government saying, you can't have your job unless you do this. That is a level of tyranny that is going beyond what we've had. Particularly, well, you know, enough said. You get the point. So that's the effect. Therefore, as soon as the people heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Those of you who are regulars, you will recognize here the chiastic structure. This section of 7 verses begins with the image of gold. It ends with the image of gold. Begins with Nebuchadnezzar, ends with Nebuchadnezzar. We have the music before, we have the music after, and what do we have in the middle? We have the bowing down to worship. That's really the point of the passage. So verse 8, therefore at a certain time Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. Why would they do that? Skip ahead to verse 12. These men are... there are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon. When foreigners came into Babylon to work for them, they took the best of the foreigners, as we've said, but they almost always worked in servitude. They worked serving under somebody else. I want your expertise, but you won't be in charge. You'll make me, the leader, look better. But because of what Daniel did, he was able to get his friends to a very high position of authority. So there's a degree of jealousy. There's perhaps a degree of xenophobia in some way, shape, or form. I don't know. But there's reasons behind this, no doubt. I think more than anything else, though, there is the problem that these people aren't being obedient. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of a horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, every kind of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Firstly, note this. This is, as would be said today, I guess, fake news. They pay no attention to you. One thing we've learned from chapter 1 is that the one thing these guys do is pay attention. They learned everything they had to learn about the astrology, the science, the system, the government. They became the absolute experts. They were the best that they could be, and they paid attention to everything. So no, that's not true. What is true is that they are not obeying by worshipping the golden image. What is true is they don't worship the Babylonian gods, but it is not true they don't pay any attention to the king. These are obedient people who will do what the king says when the king is not acting tyrannically. And the fact that they have done so has allowed them to come into a very high position and to be highly regarded. So that isn't the case, but they're not worshipping. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, notice that. It's interesting, the text doesn't just say rage, furious rage. This is a much greater than normal rage. Why? Because they're not being compliant. You have to be compliant, folks. This is the problem with these people. The problem is not that they worshipped Yahweh. The problem is not that they're from another nation. The problem is not any of that. The problem is that they're not compliant. And that's why the response of Nebuchadnezzar, even in the midst of his rage, is not to throw them in the fiery furnace. He doesn't throw them in the fiery furnace. You say, hold on a second, didn't Brian read that earlier, that that's exactly what's happened? No. They didn't get thrown in the fiery furnace. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image I've set up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? In other words, I don't simply want to punish you for not obeying. I want you to comply. You've stood up as officials in defiance when all the other officials are doing as they're told. We cannot have this. You must comply. If we have to punish you, if we have to kill you, that's only second best. We need you to comply. I think that the majority of people who get frustrated with churches in other places and people in other locations not complying is not necessarily a case of you're putting me at risk or this or that, but it's more a case of we have to do it so you do too. We actually got banned from one of our relatives' house. Not for being unvaccinated, not for anything, but you don't keep the rules and we keep the rules and we have to do it, you have to do it too, or you're not welcome. Literally, that was the reason. Compliance is just such a big... Statism and tyranny does not work without compliance. That's why the Christians were a threat to Caesar and to Rome. It wasn't because they were worshipping another god, it's because they weren't compliant. And that's why there was fury. there was fury for the lack of compliance. So I'm going to throw you in the furnace, and who is the God that will save you out of my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. That's a very intriguing statement, isn't it? We know what they're going to say. They're going to point to their God. But what an intriguing statement. We don't need to answer you this. There's two ways of looking at this. Number one is this. You're out of lane, pal. You don't have authority on this matter, so we don't have to answer you. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that they had no need to answer because he should have known. Why should he have known? Chapter 2. I lean to that explanation. That in chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar, do you recall? He said, the king answered and said to Daniel, truly your God is God of gods and Lord of kings. And now in chapter 3, he's saying, who's the God who's going to deliver you out of my hands? You've got a short memory, pal, right? God of God, King of kings. Any ring any bells? So we have no need to answer you. Verse 17 and verse 18, and this is where we'll end. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Daniel 3 is well known and beloved. It's taught generation to generation. Sunday school children know about it. It's a very well-known passage of the Bible. And it's a well-known passage of the Bible because, spoiler alert, they don't die. That's why it's a well-known passage. But let's be absolutely clear on this point. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego exercise faith here. If they'd been thrown into the furnace and their bodies had been burnt up and they died, then their faith would have been exactly the same. This story would, in one sense, be no greater. Certainly as an example of faithful obedience. They had to decide who to obey, God or the state. And they chose God. And they know, their response is this, God is able to save us, but he might not, and will die. And you know what? We're okay with that. I think the greatest tragedy of all tragedies in the church, even more so than churches handing over their authority that God had given them to Caesar, has been the fact that it's exposed that not only are most Christians not prepared to go to their death in obedience, they're not prepared to get sick in obedience either. That's just the reality of it. You say, but this is real, people die of it. Yeah, of course people die of it. I noticed just this morning that people were throwing about the example of Ray Bentley, who's a Calvary Chapel pastor down in San Diego County, who died, and I don't know if he was vaccinated or not, but apparently he died of COVID complications, and he pastors a very large church, and there's lots of people going, and they're meeting, and he's died of COVID. And we told you, see, we were right. I've never said that wouldn't be the case. I've never said that wouldn't be the case. And just in case anyone would misunderstand me, let me just say it absolutely very clearly. We are called to gather together. And yes, there are times when you're sick. And yes, there's times when you're particularly unwell. And we have a live stream for that. And that's not knocking anyone in that situation. But if you decide that, hey, for the next month, 2 months, 6 months, year, I'm going to protect myself by not coming to church. And I'm going to forsake the gathering together of the saints in disobedience to God because I don't like the consequences of this, then you are betraying the heritage of generations of Christians who have left behind their homes and their families and have put their entire life on the line for the sake of the gospel. And I will say to you clearly today that I hope that I die with my boots on, so to speak. I don't want to retire gracefully. I mean, my goodness, if my mind goes or something, then pull me out of the pulpit. Don't let me go to the very end. But if I'm able to function, then I don't want to say, oh, you know what, there's something happening here. I might get sick and I'm, 80, 90 or whatever, and I might be more vulnerable. Fine. What a way to go. Do you know what? I'm going to die one day. And my life in the scope of eternity is like a breath. You're out there on a cold, we don't get many cold mornings, but if you're up really early at this time of year, you might do it. You go out in the cold morning, and you can see your breath, and it's there, and it goes. That's your life. Boom, gone. And in eternity, life is going to go on and on and on. There's going to be a lifetime, another lifetime, another lifetime, just stacking up one after the other. And it's all just going to go by like that. And the only thing that is going to matter is not how many years I lived, not how healthy I kept myself, not whether I avoided discomfort. The only thing that's going to matter is how I served my Lord and King. That's it. And if there's one thing I want all of you to understand from all of this passage, from all of the circumstances in life right now, it's this, is that all we are called to do is bow the knee before Jesus and say, my life is yours. That is it. That's it. That's our lives. And if that means that we die, so be it. If that means we get sick, so be it. If that means that people hate us, so be it. If that means, like the Apostle Paul, we become well known throughout the world, so be it. And if that means, like the Apostle Paul, that at the end of our lives everybody deserts us and hates us and thinks that we're a nobody, then so be it. Because we do not matter. Less of us and more of him. We are here to bring glory to his holy name. Is a pastor of a large church dying of COVID complications somehow a shameful thing? No, it's a glorious thing. He knew the risk and he served his church anyway, and may God bless him for that. And indeed, that's exactly what is happening right now. He's receiving his rewards. These guys were told, you will honor the state or we will throw you into the fire. And they said, we will not bow. We have only one God. If we die, we die. Christians, may that be on every one of our hearts. Too many of us are obsessed with our own comfort, with our own well-being, with our goals and our plans and our life ambitions. Put it to death. Decide now. Learn from a man who's very fast approaching 50, who wishes that people had beaten this into his thick skull in his 20s. Because if you don't accept it, God will beat it into your thick skull. And it's not a lot of fun to learn that way. Because he will have our devotion. He will accomplish his purposes through us because he is God and he is sovereign. So friends, let us bow the knee. Let's say, wherever you lead me, I will go. And let's get on with the serious work of worshiping and serving Jesus Christ, God of God and King of Kings. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for your majesty. Father, we know that when we step out for you, you're able to save. We look to you in times of trials and difficulties. But may we be prepared to suffer the consequences of faithfulness to you. May we not neglect and forsake the meeting of the saints. It's here in this place that we're equipped by your word. It's here in this place that the equipped minister one to another. It's here in this place that we're transformed into the image of your Son like nowhere else. And so, Lord, we pray. May we be faithful in our attendance. May we be faithful in our worship. May no one and nothing come above you. May we not compromise our faith. May we not justify compliance, but may we stand firmly on our devotion to you above all others. May we obey God and, where necessary, resist tyrants. And may glory go to your holy name. Amen.